Welcome, folks, to the Squeaky Wheel. With me, as always, my very good friend, the President, Lawrence Gervais. Folks, I'm Ross, Memphis, Pambrun, and I appreciate all of your time, your commitment, and your connection with the Métis community. And Lawrence and I always enjoy it. And I always enjoy our conversation, Lawrence. And a big shout out to everyone who was participating in Earth Day that has just gone past. Hug an Australian Day, oddly, is coming up here in the next couple of days. So I don't know if I know enough of them to just be able to run around the city to hug them. But it's also the Administration Professionals Week. So folks, make sure you pay attention to them, do a little something special, and make sure you include them into your conversation and opportunities for your gathering. Lawrence, lots of fun that's happening out there. Yes, our thoughts are still with the families and the struggles and the people of the Ukraine. And our thoughts are with the families who are also being affected within the Russian community. But let's jump into a whole bunch of conversation, Lawrence. And I know we often start right into the Métis thing, but one thing I think that's kind of exciting that's happening within our nation is our Torontonian or our Haligonian who's winning at Jeopardy. This tutor, this girl is just crushing it out there. But Lawrence, what you lived in Toronto is she lived some of her time in Halifax. Is she a Haligonian or is she a Torontonian?
Well, I think if you lived in Toronto and you're from Toronto, they would refer to her as a Haligonian and not a local. But, not a lot of people from Toronto are local either. I mean, I was there and I lived in Harbourfront in downtown in Cabbagetown, and I never really left the city except for a few times, very rare. But no, I mean, you had everything there. It was great. But I think she's a Haligonian. And just like me, I couldn't wait to get back to BC and see the mountains again. Almost every day I was there, I just missed them.
I know we'll probably get some angry emails from people out east. But yes, Mateo Roach, I think she's on 13 wins in a row. So absolutely fabulous. But yes, as I always say, I love going east, but I sure love living out west. So I like Toronto. I like going to visit. It's a nice place, but yes, I am so much happier when I'm headed back out west. And I agree, just because you end up in the center of the universe of Toronto doesn't mean that all of a sudden you're a Torontonian. I think at heart, I would still suggest that, yeah, that girl's a Haligonian. But folks, if I'm wrong, fire me an email, ross@thesqueakywheel.ca. Lawrence, president of the Manitoba Métis Federation, David Chartrand, has been asking for the Pope to bless the grave of Louis Riel and the Papal visit, which I think they're still exploring for some time near the later part of July. The Pope has started to acknowledge, the Pope has started to provide some apologies. I'm going to be bringing up something that is a little bit more contentious here shortly, but in the case of the action of Louis Riel, what does that represent when it comes to an apology?
Well, I mean, I know our trip was there for the residential school survivors specifically. An apology is, it's important, but action is very, very important too. And like I said last episode, the Pope really didn't apologize about, the grave sites. And that was one thing that we were probably wanting to hear. But maybe that'll come later on. I'm not sure. But, certainly Louis Riel's history with the Catholic Church, we all know he was raised there and educated by, the system there too. And they had certainly at one point turned their backs on the Métis during the rebellion phase, right? But I don't really think that that's what the whole cause was for the visit. The visit was all about the survivors who went to residential school. And certainly that was prior to Louis Riel's time. After Louis Riel's time, that a lot of these things did happen. So, yeah, I guess it's if it's a site that the Pope wants to do, that's really up to him. But I really think it's about that. It's really about the survivors.
I really like that point. Maybe because Louis Riel represented somewhat of a polarizing influence within our nation, maybe that's the reason. They're looking for a place where there's a lot of awareness by Canadians of the relationship between the Métis community.
Yeah.
Originally history had written, that Louis Riel was treasonous. Well, again, sometimes history is written by the victor, as it were. And when you start to really look at the actions that had occurred at that time, it seems as though the individuals who were judging on behalf of the crown saying, well, this is, okay, I guess we could say he's treasonous. But I think that was a very difficult decision, and I don't even think they may have agreed with it. But, a decision was made, and, lives were affected by it. So maybe that's the reason. Maybe it's a polarizing spot in order to try and connect the community.
Yeah, but, I firmly believe there's places in Manitoba that are appropriate, like residential schools or grave sites or any of those places, yeah.
Well, and then to segue into the fact that the flooding waters the Red River is starting to dam again as the ice breaks up and it's starting to come through. Let's hope these places are not underwater in July. It's not like this is unusual for our nation. We've talked about these 100-year floods in Alberta, and then all of a sudden 2 years later, 3 years later, the flooding happens again. I think we need to really start to respect the idea of how the climate impacts are allowing for increased water, and how are we going to manage it, right? The world has often changed how we move water around in order to meet our needs. Well, sometimes Mother Earth throws a staunch curveball, and in this case, the flood waters are rising. I think it was in this week in Manitoba that there's 600 people are affected by power outages. 14,000 people are starting to be affected by the ever increasing power loss and the effects of this much water on their community. And this is going to start to extend from, now this is one I was a little unfamiliar, Winnipegosis down to the United States border. Does Winnipegosis, I think this might have been in CBC, represent that Winnipeg area? Is that the term? I might have to look that one up.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that term at all, but maybe it does. Maybe it means the confluence of all the rivers, because there is a lot that come from that area. You have a river system going in all directions, even through the States, that kind of derive from the Red River.
That is such a nice term, Lawrence. The confluence of rivers. It's like our conversation. It's a confluence of beautiful ideas from two staunch, proud Métis individuals as we're navigating the Indigenous and specifically Métis conversations. I love that term, folks. I want you to use that term, confluence, somewhere in your conversations today. But you're absolutely right. I let's hope that they that their terrestrial little area is going to be able to manage all of that water. But it has every other year. It's happened.
Yeah, there are floods. There are floods here in Alberta, and then Saskatchewan and Manitoba gets them. Yeah, but this is the time of year, spring, when everything breaks up now. So.
Yeah, and that water just comes in an awful rush. So let's jump into something positive, Lawrence, before we head back into a couple of sort of, I think, would be considered racist kind of actions that have occurred. But the Métis curler, Carrie Einerson. Now, you know a little bit more about her, and I don't know why I haven't seen her name popping up in curling as much as I have when I'm watching the big games with mom and dad. But take me through a little bit of her history.
Yeah, this isn't a segue to someone being racist. That's Carrie is not a racist person.
No. Okay, those are two completely separate discussions that will happen afterwards. Yes, yeah. I wanted to talk about something positive before we have these other conversations. Okay. So to all of our listeners out there, don't chop that piece out and all of a sudden say, Lawrence, that's funny how you heard that. That's fabulous.
Yeah, but no, Carrie, I think she's the 3-time national champion, and she's, curler. And I started watching a little bit because, I watched a lot. I actually played a lot when I was a kid. When you grow up in Prince George, it's even part of the PE curriculum, and walking to the curling rink with, getting on the rink itself, and a bunch of teenagers and all the older guys are looking at who are these kids, and they're ruining our ice type thing. And
they're just ruining our ice.
We're just there fooling around, whatever. But it is a very interesting game to play. And I get into it and I watch it, and I think nearing the 10th end, it gets really interesting. But Carrie is very, she's very proud to be Métis. I think she's from Gimli, Manitoba, and so watching it, and then all of a sudden we see Asham as a sponsor, and they do curling stuff, and that's certainly a Métis name that we all know, Asham, and so it's kind of interesting how we can see it through a Métis lens now, right, and what that looks like. To me, it was always just Chuckwagons, and I can spot the drivers there. But now I'm looking at curling, going, "Hey, maybe that person's Métis. I don't even know."
You hit on some things. I often comment, and I know I have on our show before, that I've never actually thrown a legitimate, good quality curling rock on the ice. I've on outdoor rinks where they just have the old ones made out of cement with just an old, like essentially a handle put into it. I've done that, and I love watching curling. Love it. Love watching it with mom and dad, because I know, being from Saskatchewan, they just love that sport. But yeah, I haven't had that familiarity of seeing her play, and I find that very surprising. So now I'm excited to watch for her.
So she's the current, actually. She wears the Canada uniform and everything right now.
Yep.
Yeah. But when you play curling, you either have to get it above that mark, right, to go to the button, which you probably couldn't get the rock to cross that line, or you probably overthrow it and hit the hack and totally destroy their hack system. So.
And that's that part. You can tell those old timers when they see you come in that, you're just essentially going to ruin the ice. Though I would have to respect any sport where you have to walk generally through the bar in order to get to the ice. What a fabulous idea.
Yeah, and here I live in Airdrie. That's no secret, but I think I took the little boy to get his vaccination, and all these curlers were coming out. It was just like a hordes of them, and it was it looks like they're having fun, and it was like a good party going on in the curling rink right beside the son getting his vaccination. So I thought maybe I should join the curling club.
Yeah, maybe that's where we should get our vaccinations as well as throw a few rocks. Let's talk a little bit about Chuckwagons, Lawrence, because the Stampede just had their tarp auction.
Yeah.
Now, the issue had been that the Chucks hadn't been there for the Stampede. There was a bit of back and forth infighting. It looks as though the Chuckwagons are going to be back. I think that energy that the Chuckwagons bring to the Stampede, the history, the connection with our sport of rodeo and those relationships, I'm pretty excited about it. And I think the tarp auction went fantastic this year.
Yeah, and I'm not excited about the rules changes, of course. I'd rather see 4 wagons than just 3, but that's just me. At one time I would see, 4 outriders and 4 wagons and going around the track. But then they limit that to 2 outriders, and then pretty soon it's just 3 teams now. But that's Chuckwagons to me growing up. And certainly the drivers need the support. They've hit COVID has probably impacted a lot of these horses because they do need that bit of exercise, right? And if they can't get that, certainly they're going to be out of shape too, and that's when complications kind of happen. So we want to make sure that these horses are well taken care of and exercised and all those things too, right? So
well, that's the part that I love about the rodeo and that family and community, is they care more for their animals than they do, a lot of times for themselves. They understand the value of these are animals that are just part of their family, and they're doing their best in order to give them that opportunity to do what they're naturally able to do. So I 100% support for the Chuckwagons, big supporter of our rodeo. I don't like the idea that we, our community occasionally just bends over because some activist says, well, I think that animal's being hurt. And yet they've never participated. They've never been involved, never had a conversation. And then when you look into their history, sometimes some of these societies out there, some of their actions don't seem to be questioned the way they seem to question everybody else. So, we'll probably get slapped at some point for that.
Well, the thoroughbred, the racehorses that they do use, they have a very short window of opportunity to race, and then after that they just go to afterlife or however they're sort of dealt with. But with Chuckwagons, they kind of prolong their life a little bit longer, right? And they're a little more
That's
active.
right.
And
Yeah.
And they're not cheap horses either, so they're an asset to you, and as a driver, and you want to take care of that asset as much as possible, you know. And whether and they do care about these horses too, because it's part of their family.
Based on some of the meals I've eaten at some of the events that I've attended, I think those horses may eat better than I do occasionally. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about, Lawrence, Simcoe County in Ontario. After the acknowledgements by the Pope regarding his apologies, and in this case, I think it was more to the First Nation community, this newspaper had put out a cartoon published in their editorials, 7 local newspapers, and it shows the Pope and he's saying, "I'm sorry." And then it shows sort of the First Nation representative saying, "How $sorry are you?" Which is implying that their expectation from this apology is, well, how financially obligated are you to this apology? And that immediately set off, bells and whistles within all the different Indigenous communities, that who allowed such a slap in the face, racist kind of cartoon to be published. When I look at it, and maybe I'll try and see if we can get Devin just to throw it up there, but here's a cartoon that is essentially just implying that the only value towards receiving this apology is what dollar sign is going to come with it. Is the accountability for, journalists and editorialists that people just stop reading? Is that the ability? Should there be a cartoon where the First Nation is standing outside of that newspaper's building going, "Okay, how badly do you feel about your cartoon that you put out, dollar sign?" Is that the action that's going to be taken? What should happen?
Well, I mean, I don't, I think in that action is really geared towards an editor. The columnists and all these things, they try to take a neutral position, but ever since history, we've had these political cartoons in newspapers, and we go all the way back to Riel's time, and it was the same thing. But people they try to create that controversy around a cartoon, and then they all want people to discuss it, and maybe that's what they wanted to do: draw attention to their paper in just the worst way you can, right?
Well, and actually, you're right, Lawrence. Maybe it did work. Look at us; we're talking about it now.
Yeah, that's right, and I think that needs to stop. I think that intentional harm to draw viewers needs to stop from media. But I mean, they're going to probably shut us down now just for saying that. But
yeah,
but and that's what sometimes it is. It's just these editors and these people who manage the paper. They're the problem, obviously, and they need to change their sort of attitudes when they see something like that, and they draw that little sign to go, yeah, print that page, and they go to the next one, and they go, yeah, print that page. They go through the whole thing, right? They know,
right?
So, it's really distasteful, and having, I think there's a person of a headdress and an elder standing beside him, and it's just, you don't do stuff like that. It's too sensitive.
I agree. I think it's a very sensitive thing, and but I appreciate your comment about the fact that you're right. There is an editorialist or an editor, and that's sort of his role. And maybe it doesn't befall all of the newspaper. And I think you're right. How we assign certain responsibility, it comes down to recognizing that individual has made an error. And actually, that extends to one of the other comments that I wanted to make. Recently, just this week, a British Columbia Hockey League commentator was fired. He's banned from further broadcasting after he made seemingly a racist remark, in the sense that at a hockey game between two teams, in his commentary, he was referring to one of the players who's 5'7", and he's pushing back at a defenseman who's much taller than him. And this guy's commenting about how he might have to get a ladder to talk to him. But his statement afterwards in that same breath was, but does he speak English? Maybe that's the problem. So, you know, in the game of sport, why does that matter? Right? Like, and I think here he's pointing to something that this individual maybe isn't proficient at, and what level of proficiency would be required. This is for a hockey game. Now, the league has apologized, from what I understand. The broadcaster has apologized. Even this guy has apologized. And maybe the consequence here is and that he's been let go. But much like the editor of that newspaper, maybe that is where some of the responsibility does fall, right on the individual who made it. And I don't know if we should punish people forever. I think that those people have to learn why that statement was impactful, harmful, and then work to get back within those communities, because, to rebuild some of that relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say, forever, but it definitely, for a time frame, they start to understand it, or at least or they go through some ceremony to understand what they said was wrong. And not like the Belak situation where where the senator went through all this Aboriginal training and then still was making those statements, right? Then that might be a long-term punishment for that person, right?
There might be,
yeah. But if this person is, making their way and walking that path to make things better, and they're going to ceremony and they're seeking Indigenous people and they're doing that the way that's supposed to, well then, that is a good thing, and those are steps forward.
And we have to look at these as opportunities to learn for all of us.
That's right. Yeah.
I know, Lawrence, somehow if you look back through the footage of any of our podcasts, at some point, somebody's going to say somehow that we said a term wrong. But one of the things that I think we really focus on is always sharing that part of the conversation. This is a positive, forward relationship. Our podcast is meant to create awareness, learn together, try to always continue to move forward into the best way to find positivity in relationships, gathering, connection, and within all aspects of Indigenous community. I like that. We stand on those values as far as I'm concerned. But there's always going to be people who are working to try and break some of those down, or to try and look for one word that might have been in error. But I think the important part is that that's not our intent. And I'm hoping that this broadcaster realizes, that was never his intent. Somehow it came out, but he has to do the work now.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's how you create that change. And I think for the newspaper, they should just do a whole newspaper dedicated to Indigenous people. As a result.
I like that idea.
The broadcaster too should bring in elders, bring in people to sit beside them and talk about things just openly, right? To get the viewers on board.
Folks, for those of you who are just listening, you can't see, the light is on. It's flashing red. Devin's sending the signal off. It's time for Indigenous Plant Conversation. Let's move on to something that's nice and fun and conversational. Lawrence, what do you got for us this week?
Well, I have Chuckwagons. I hope I said that right.
Choke Cherries.
Yes, Choke Cherries. Yeah, that's good. So this berry shrub grows in the open and roadsides and on streams. It flowers in April or late May, and it bears clusters of blackberries when ripe. They have a large pit. I don't know if people put a choke cherry in their mouth, but it has a very interesting taste to it. Somebody call it astringent, but it's used for jellies, and you can add it with other fruits. And you can also use the medicine for a dry cough, pneumonia, those types of things too, as well as the vitamins that you get from the actual berry itself. So that's one thing that I wanted to mention, and something that I grew up eating myself, and as much as I can when I was foraging, and back then we could run around the neighborhood when we were little, and you could actually forage a bit, and that was something that we sustained ourselves on, was choke cherries, as well as Saskatoons and hazelnuts and those things.
This will sound like a silly question, because I know we've talked about it a little bit before, but I'm actually not 100% familiar. Were choke cherries used in pemmican? Like, was it just any berry, was used in
Yeah.
pemmican combined. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. I mean, just to, give it a little more taste or whatever. I'm sure the old pemmican that was sitting in your pocket for, about a year and you ate it, you'd probably
Yeah.
want a little bit of a nice, interesting taste to it. So
The par flash, right? That that oiled leather bag with lard that would sort of keep everything. And I think we had this on our conversation one time before, where on the show we talked about that they had discovered these par flash bags that had been buried in the ground, and technically that pemmican was still edible. Now that could be 50-year-old pemmican sitting in the ground. Maybe a 50-year-old whiskey, Scotch. Maybe I'd be interested. I'm not 100% sure that I'd want to try that, but being a little bit guarded. But yeah, no, those kind of berries end up being one of those where you see them out there. 90% of the time, I never know whether or not whether you can eat that. Right. Maybe I should just make a soup out of it first.
Yeah, I mean, when you grow up around it, I mean, there's definitely berries you don't want to touch because you'll get sick. So you got to be extra careful, especially when there's multiple seeds in those berries. You got to watch out.
And now, Lawrence, I need to apologize to you. One of the last week, I forgot to bring up the conversation about Terry Fox.
Oh yeah,
there's his Métis heritage. There's a new plaque that was being located outside of BC Place. Now, you have a bit more familiarity when it comes to that area than I do. Take us through a little bit about what was happening at that time in BC.
Well, I mean, it was funny because one day I was working in the downtown east side amongst all these youth doing construction. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to change my job and just do part-time work on a construction site. So I, found the company, and we were building these 2 large high-rises beside BC Place. And I used to walk over to the Terry Fox statue and have my lunch and those types of things. And we'd all be standing around there and, reading the plaque of, him, but never really knowing later on that he's actually Métis. And now at that plaque outside BC Place, they've put in there that he's actually has Métis. He's a Métis man.
Métis.
Individual.
Yeah.
And they had the family out there. They had Métis Nation of British Columbia at a ceremony last week, and being very public and open about it, which is very interesting for us. And so if they decide to put Terry Fox on a bill, then we know we have an Indigenous person there.
Boy, how exciting would that be? And that man should make that. Since the Marathon of Hope began, April 12th, 1980, the Terry Fox Foundation has raised over $850 million for cancer research. And I know at the time when he was coming out, in order to start his journey, share his message of the challenge of cancer and try and make it across Canada, that was at a time, I was just a little bit young, but my brother, for example, was a little bit older than me. That Terry Fox influenced that generation for his hope. The fact that nobody had done that before. Here was somebody who was willing to give so much of himself in order to try and share this message. So still an inspiration. And the Terry Fox Foundation, thank you for what you do in order to support cancer research for somebody who is a cherished individual. And I'm excited that, we're recognizing his Métis relationship.
Yeah, and they should. I mean, I know they've done these biopics about him, but there should be a feature film about Terry Fox. I don't know why no one's really produced it or directed it yet. So,
folks, if any of you are putting that video out there, Lawrence and I would love to be in there, even just spectators or just maybe somebody who drives one of the vehicles that was part of his support team. So if you're looking for somebody in order to participate in that show, send them over this way. We'd love to be a part of that. Lawrence, let's close out our show with a little bit of sports talk otherwise. Oilers just secured a playoff position. They had assisted, even though the Flames would pretty much knew that they were probably going to make the playoffs, but they had, by winning one of their games, the Flames were making the playoffs. And I couldn't be more excited, to have these two teams in. And there's even a chance that if one was to win and one was to win this other game, they might even play off against each other. Boy, just imagine the battle that would happen here in Alberta.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that happened last time, didn't it? When they get knocked out? Calgary got knocked out by Edmonton.
Lawrence, I can't remember who won the World Series last year. I can't remember who won football last year. I can't remember who. I'm not good at that. The good thing about sport is it's you're only as good as your last win, and you're only as good as the effort you're putting into the next game. Like that's how I've always sort of focused on sport. Yeah.
Well, the Battle of Alberta means a lot here because it's not only during the regular season, it's also during the playoffs, right? So
yes,
that's why it gets a little bit. They're a little bit. We compete quite a bit between Edmonton and Calgary, especially with our hockey.
And I was excited about Vancouver's run, but it was on them to have to try and win every game to finish the season, and they were doing good. But fortunately, they just lost out and making a playoff position. But yeah, shooting for Alberta.
Yeah, and I was hoping the return of Carey Price would have been a little bit more dreamlike, but he's certainly he's not. I think his athletic ability is not quite there because he's entering the very late season, right?
Maybe he'll get an opportunity to heal up over the off season, since maybe it'll just be golf for him. And our Blue Jays are doing fabulous, and we could talk about them on our next episode. So, Lawrence, I just want to say thank you again, folks, from everybody behind the scene, from Devin, from Leighton, from myself, the captain. I can't thank you enough. Make sure you click subscribe. Make sure you fire off your emails to us. Keep us in the conversation. We want to hear from you, and we want to continue to share a positive conversation and a fun one. So, Lawrence, from all of us here at the Squeaky Wheel, folks, keep the wheel squeaking. The Squeaky Wheel is brought to you by the Squeaky Wheel Company, co-hosted by the President, Lawrence Gervais, from M&A Region 3, and the Captain, Ross Memphis Pambrun. Our program is broadcast from Calgary, in Region 3 of the Métis Nation of Alberta, which is part of the historic Métis Nation homeland. We also acknowledge these lands are the traditional territories of Treaty 7, Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, Tsuut'ina, and Stoney Nakoda, with whom we share this land on the basis of our historical and ongoing relationships. You can always reach us for comment about our programming by email at tsw@thesqueakywheel.ca or find us on our website, www.squeakywheel.ca, and our socials. For our comments, it is our focus to recognize all of our First Nations and Indigenous friends, share connection with Métis settlements, and listen to and show respect to our Métis brothers and sisters and families. Here at the Squeaky Wheel, we give thanks to our elders for their guidance and to Mother Earth for her time she allows us to be here and share her bounty. From all of us at the Squeaky Wheel, Tansi.